What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of 10x Recruiting. All right, Sile, we want to give our listeners the 2 to 3 most important takeaways from this episode. Today, I spoke with Thach Nguyen. Thach is an exec recruiter right now, but he's had some major hits on his resume, like Airbnb and Sword and a number of other places. What were your 2 to 3 takeaways?
Biggest things for me were, firstly, I've heard the analogies drawn between recruiting teams and sales teams, a million times before, but definitely the way that Thach talked about it in terms of, the amount of investment we put into ramping salespeople, the fact you don't let them near their ICP, their prospects, customers, maybe for months before you really let them loose on those customers. And then drawing that stark contrast to what we do with recruiters and how we onboard them, give them a machine, say, go ahead, have at it, go and delight this hiring manager and delight these candidates. Like, that's a really stark contrast that really sort of gave me pause around, I guess, the distance recruiting has to go to figure out how to change that culture and treat those interactions more as really precious. So I think that was one thing that really struck me. And I've got a few war stories about how we almost onboard salespeople here at Metaview, frankly, that, it really reminded me of, and how we don't always match that up against how we deal with recruiters. So that was one. And then I think the other really big point, which, is a bit of a recurring theme, but I think, we're going to keep on talking about it until, frankly, something changes, is a lot of the bad behaviors that I think we all witness in recruiting, whether as a recruiting leader, a recruiter yourself, a hiring manager, a lot of the bad behaviors stem from incentives. Show me the incentive and I'll show you the behavior. If a recruiter is getting measured on time to fill, if a recruiter is going to have to show up at their next, maybe they get laid off in the next riff and they show up at their next interview to try and join a hot company and they're getting asked, what was your time to fill? How many butts and seats did you get? You're going to optimize your workflow for that. And that is not always necessarily what the business needs out of you. And so I think Thach sort of gave a lot of context about those things, which was really compelling and sort of just really articulated it in an amazing way. So yeah, looking forward to seeing what folks think of it.
Totally. All right. So here's the 2 for me is he said most companies are built on 5 to 10 people. And that's been very true in my career. But the thing underneath the thing is, if you're early stage, you need to be really good at identifying undiscovered talent. So I love that one. And then me and him got into this discussion around like why recruiters actually should sell against their own company. And so specifically around that is like, it's one thing to like identify a great potential candidate. It's another thing to identify a great fit between candidate and company. And I think one of the ways that you can do that is actually by selling against the company and against the role and being candid about where the warts are there. So you guys are going to love this episode. Let us know what you think in the comments. And here's my episode with Thach. This is the 10X Recruiting Podcast. Let's get after it. What's up, everybody? Welcome to 10X Recruiting. And today we have a great friend from way back in the day. Thach, welcome to the show, man.
Hi. Thanks, Nolan.
So people don't know this, but we met in 2012, back when Google was cool. And you were a recruiter who I aspired to be like. And I was one of your recruiting coordinators. I never got the chance to like thank you for it, but I do appreciate that you didn't haze me. You were always really nice to me. You took me under your wing. And I think in general, you were a really good model of what, recruiting coordinators can look up to. So thanks for always looking out for me, man. I appreciate it.
You're definitely giving me way too much credit, but I will say that I love telling my team all the time that Nolan Church, who they all know about, I'm like, yeah, like he's my recruiting coordinator. So like, just remember, like, be nice to everyone. And like, I think I was a good recruiter to him. I don't think I ever gave him a hard time, but most importantly, like, I'm so proud of you. And you're one of my favorite. You're one of my favorite people. So
thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right, enough about me. Let's get into you. So you were at Google. You then went to Airbnb. Then you were at Care of and Sword Health, and now you've started your own business, Plenty Search. You've been there for like the last 4 to 5 years. You are absolutely killing it. And what I love most about your background is that you've seen all of it. You've seen the big companies. You've seen small companies. You've done internal operating as a recruiter, and now you're doing the agency side of things. So I want to start with like, probably the term of 2024 and likely at least the term of beginning of 2025, which is talent density. What do companies that have a high density of world-class talent have in common?
Two things come to mind. The first one is really viewing people as a product. So, one thing I'll say is like the companies, and I'm thinking beyond Sword now. I'm thinking of all the clients that we've supported, and of course, like my time at Google, Airbnb, care of. I don't think that the best companies, the companies with the highest growth, the largest revenue, are necessarily the companies with the best sales teams. I think having a great sales team is really useful. Don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, you're only as good as your product, right? Your sales teams are only good as your product. And so with recruiting and people, I find that most founders are way too fixated. Like if I could push a button, I wish founders cared 20% less about recruiting and 20% more about the product, which is, I guess if you would call it like people, human resources, right? Like what type of experience are you providing? What's for value proposition for employees? And so an example of that for me is when I joined Airbnb, we were so good at recruiting and bringing people in because this incredible product, people use it. Like, it kind of sells itself in some ways, not to take away the job the recruiting team did. But in the beginning, we didn't have excellent people practices where like performance was a real thing. It was we were so rah. Brian Chesky's an incredible human being. He was so inspirational, but to the point where as a company, we had never developed the ability to have difficult conversations. And so over time, that was really easy when we were, had product market fit, doubling, tripling year over year. When shit got really real and we were missing goals and we were preparing for IPO and, sales targets weren't being hit, people were really disappointed that they weren't getting their promotions every 6 months. They weren't getting their salary raises because we really hadn't built this culture of performance. And that was a really tough year for Airbnb. This is around 2016, 2017. Luckily, we did get our shit together. Luckily, we brought in a big boy, mature CFO who was like, this is not how you run a company. And I'm shortcutting a little bit, but we eventually got to a point where people understood what success looked like. People understood what expectations looked like, but it took a really long time. And I think we could have actually saved ourselves a lot of heartache had we built that early on and not been so fixated on purely recruiting.
Totally. I think a lot of companies end up in like recruit at all costs and like they just get into like recruit mode. And your point's actually really good, which is like focus on the product, and product market fit tends to solve like a lot of problems in businesses, including I think Airbnb. You guys were a recruiting juggernaut. I remember losing many candidates to you guys when I was at DoorDash. I remember your office when I would go over there and eat lunch with my friend Melissa, and like the wall that had like I remember this wall was like an entirely green like living wall. I can't even imagine what that cost you guys, and like obviously amazing recruiting tactics. But meanwhile, like little old DoorDash down the street where we were losing candidates to you guys was like relentlessly focused on the product. And ultimately, I think both companies ended up being successful. Us took a little bit longer than you guys to get there. But one of the things I learned is at DoorDash, we were pretty ruthless about talent. We had the tough conversations. It was actually part of our interview process. We would give candidates really tough feedback on their interview to see how they responded, because that was the way that they were going to interact when they got to the company as full-time employees. And we had that expectation. And I think you can get away with some of those things when you have insatiable demand for your product, like Airbnb, especially at that time. We couldn't get away with not living in reality. And so we actually baked it into our interview process.
A couple of thoughts. The first one is I'm really offended you went to Airbnb offices and didn't call me up to have lunch. So that I'm gonna put that aside for a second. Yeah, completely. I think that number one, I didn't know DoorDash did that actually. And that's a real testament. I think that the reason why is because HR is actually kind of a scary topic for a lot of founders. We can spend some time there, but that's a whole nother topic in itself. Where I think a lot of founders I've worked with, their comfort is product, their comfort is engineering, their comfort is actually even sales, but they do not feel as comfortable talking about people and culture, at least like not beyond the surface level. Like I feel like everyone just kind of repeats the same old stuff. And so recruiting is the easiest of the HR umbrella because it's so binary, right? It's black and white. Like you hired the person or not. You hit your recruiting targets or not. And so I've just found that the best founders and the best companies are the ones who are able to kind of go beyond it on a deeper surface level. So like the example I always give when I talk to founders is like when you have sales teams, like the most good companies I know, right? You don't just hire a salesperson and say, go sell, right? They go through typically a rigorous sales boot camp. They do product demos, they talk to customers, right? Like they go through many ringers before they're even allowed to like do their first outbound lead and represent the company. In my experience, Nolan, I don't know what yours has been, easily 90%, probably even more of companies I work with, when they hire a recruiter, they give them an email address and a LinkedIn license and they say go, right? And like there's not the same rigor. Like you would never let a salesperson go and like, hey, like, yeah, just say whatever you want about the product, right? Like say whatever you want about our positioning. Like how many companies out there have even done the work of like, who are our talent competitors? You know? How do you know how to sell and recruit when you haven't even defined who you're recruiting against?
Totally. You're going to get me on a tangent now. So I want to talk to you about good and bad recruiters. And I think this is the perfect segue into this topic. I actually think the best recruiters are so steeped in the team and the product that they're not trying to hit their to be hired target at all costs. And in fact, will miss that target by saying things like, we could make this higher, but I don't think this person meets our bar. That is excellence from a recruiter. And I feel like, to your point around like how we onboard recruiters and they're somewhat separate from the business, the best ones are just fully steeped and can speak the language of the business in the same way that a business operator can.
I would say this applies to both recruiting and HR. So I'm gonna, for at least for this topic, apply it to both roles or the whole HR org. I've been pretty shocked, Nolan, by the chief people officers I've worked with. We do a lot of chief people officer roles at Plenty, so that's a specific demographic that I speak to all the time, where there's such an aversion to the business. The issue that I've seen with chief people officers is they don't lean into the business, the majority of them, and I think I'm gonna give you an uncomfortable compliment right now. Like when I listen to you, when we've spoken, like that's the thing that really stands out to you. Like Nolan, I feel like you could truly go and run an operations team if you wanted, right? You could go and run a CX team, a product team if you wanted, because you're really curious about the business, not just like the people aspect. And I think that most chief people officers, like they probably couldn't read a financial statement for you. They probably couldn't read a balance sheet. And that really scares me. And I think that's why Plenty, 90% of the majority of the time when we are talking to CEOs, we really advise someone who has spent time like a tour of duty outside of HR, because it's demonstrating that they have real interest and like in developing their business acumen.
Well, I appreciate the compliment. What I'll say is, I think tactically for people listening to this, it's okay to ask dumb questions. And it took me a while to like get comfortable with being the village idiot, is the way I like to describe it. But it's actually okay if you sit down with one of your finance people, don't do it to your CFO. But if you just sit down with like one of your finance people and just say, yo, I've been looking at the P&L. Can you help me? Can you read it to me the way that you see it? Right? Because it's like one that you can run through ChatGPT, you can watch a bunch of YouTube videos, but like asking them specifically to tell you how they see things and what they're looking out for will tune your brain to it. And so I think just asking like good questions to those people, they love, because then they can teach you. People like to teach people things, it turns
Yeah.
out. So that's like one thing tactically that I did at DoorDash with our first finance guy, Will Hauser. And I was just like, Will, what do you look? This business is super complex. Like, what are you looking at? The other thing is sitting with people. And I don't mean like sitting in the same office as them. I mean, like, go shadow them. Like, literally, like, go sit with them. So Tony made us do this. I've talked about this a bunch, but we had to go dash at DoorDash. And I thought it was the dumbest fucking thing ever. I was like, I have a million things to do. We have 100 open roles. It's just me. Like, what are we doing here? And I was dead wrong, because that time that I spent actually, like, number one, going out and dashing, number two, doing customer support, and then number three, like, going with our sales team to try and bring on new restaurants, gave me an understanding of the business that helped me build the team and the people that we needed to hire to be successful. The other thing is, with recruiting, and Thach, we can talk about like smaller companies specifically, because not every company has a big brand. Even if you are a hot company, but like, you're early stage, you're still competing against bigger logos. When you deeply understand how a business works, it's like a cheat code, because no one else gets it. And so when they're talking to you, they're like, holy shit, like, they understand this. It makes them believe that you're going to win. And so I'm curious, what else have you seen at some of these smaller companies? Like, what are people doing to win the talent? Because that is ultimately the thing. There is a finite supply of good talent. Like, how do you go win that?
Before we move on to that topic, can I mention something else about the good versus bad recruiter thing? Because I think it's a really meaty topic. Nolan, you and I get, like, I feel like we probably both get calls all the time about like recruiting is broken. Like, it feels like there's like a systemic thing for every one company where recruiting is going well. I feel like there's 10 where the founders complaining, the VCs are complaining, they're not hiring fast enough, like they don't get what we're trying to do. Like, I think that the recruiter role is just badly designed. I was actually giving this thought recently that like the way that we interact with candidates, the way that we get candidate information, the way we even pitch and sell candidates jobs has dramatically changed in the last 30 years. But the recruiter role has largely not changed, right? Like, you're doing scheduling, you're going through inbound applicants, you're selling, you're working with hiring managers. Like, the role is actually so incredibly multifaceted that it requires a lot of people. I actually have a confession to make. 3 out of 4 recruiters that have worked for me earlier in my career, I actually have fired. And I used to think back when I was young and naive that, wow, like, these people aren't good enough, right? Like, I need to hire better people. But when it's that, if your batting average is that, I think you have to take a real hard look and being like, am I doing something wrong? Like, is there something wrong about like the way I'm managing these folks? And like what I mentioned earlier, like, there's so many things thrown at them: scheduling, working candidates, hiring managers, closing, selling. There's all these endless things that it's really hard for one person to be excellent at all of those things. And I wish what I had done instead, looking back, was really look at like, what are the like 2, 3, 4, like even 5 things, like, if you want to be generous, that this person needs to be excellent at, and how can we remove everything else? Because the amount of context switching that a recruiter has to do is pretty insane, and I think most jobs in the corporate sector actually can't compare.
What are the 2 things that they should focus on?
I think being incredible relationship builders with candidates and hiring managers. You can't be successful if you aren't excellent at those 2 things. And number 2, really smart around what the role requires and what skills and attributes are necessary to be successful in that role. So the things that don't make the list, and I am in favor of us redesigning the role, giving it a new name, is like, when I work with companies nowadays where like the recruiters scheduling, I'm like, there's so many ways to augment that nowadays. Like, why are you having a person making 100K, 150K doing this, right? Going through applications, even LinkedIn sourcing. I know that that's a higher level skill set, but like to do it really, really well, right? You need to be able to like completely block a couple hours out of your time and like have uninterrupted work. And I think most recruiters can't find an hour of uninterrupted work, let alone a few hours. And so I think that's something that there's a lot of resources, offshore software that nowadays smart companies, progressive companies should not be having recruiters do that, in my opinion.
So I agree with you. I think where I would add an addendum on the relationship building is I think a recruiter's job is to understand where a potential relationship with the candidate could go right and also to predict where it can go wrong. And I just don't see recruiters doing this right now. So specifically on the go wrong piece, because everyone wants to talk about where it can go right. We all get into sell mode. We want you to come work here. We give you the bear hug after the offer comes out. Like everyone does that shit now. But what's more interesting is being truly earnest about where the warts are inside of the company, what it's like working with the hiring manager. I had a conversation with the candidate today, and I did exactly this thing. And I said, look, I don't even want to talk about the success mode because the success mode is super obvious, right? Like you love it, you get rich, right? You're having a lot of fun. Like all those things here's where it can go wrong. And specifically with this person, I was describing like, how the hiring manager operates on their worst day, where the pain points of the job are, how wide the aperture of the responsibilities are, including some really menial tasks that I personally would get no energy doing. I just don't see people doing that. Like that is where the meat actually is like, help me avoid a nightmare hire and help me improve my efficacy of top talent, like inside the company. I don't see people doing that. And I think if recruiters did more of that, they would be more respected inside their companies.
100%. I think that like that takes a rare recruiter. They exist, but there's not a lot of them.
Why
And
though?
so I think
Why does it have to be rare? Like, why do you think it's like a nuance thing? Is it like a seniority? Are they scared to do it thing?
I think the incentives, like my knee jerk is like, right, like you recruiters, the first thing you ask them when you interview, even internally performance reviews, right? Like, what's your offer acceptance rate? What was
Exactly.
how many hires did you make this quarter, right? You don't get a gold star, unfortunately, for really good job helping us avoid that potential mishire right there, right?
It's
And
hard to measure,
so
right?
it's
Yeah.
super hard to measure. And this kind of like, I mean, taking everything back to like the reason why I think like founders and companies tend to like to, startups at least, tend to like to focus on recruiting is that it's black and white. And maybe it shouldn't be so black and white, right? I mean, this is where I think we're identifying problems and not coming up with immediate solutions. But one thing I want to call about what you said, Nolan, which I completely agree with, is this doesn't apply to just recruiters. One thing that the last few years has been so incredible for is up until 2021, I'd worked with 3 founders in my life. And all of my instincts and philosophies had been drawn from working with those 3. In the last 4 years, I've worked with 300 founders, and my data set is so much wider, and there's such strong patterns. And one of the many things that I've identified is when you ask a founder, hey, tell me why someone should be excited about your company. Tell me why someone should be excited about this opportunity. It's pretty crazy. 90% will say the exact same thing. And like the lack of self-awareness that like you just said that the opportunity to build something, the opportunity to be part of, a bigger mission, the opportunity to grow, upside, literally these are descriptive of all of your talent competitors and is not unique at all. And like the best founders are the ones, and it's rare, similar to recruiters, where like today I would say less than 10% of founders I work with have the ability to do this. The ability to like be honest about like what be honest about what working for them will be like this equity might not be worth anything, you know? When you tell when candidates, like one of my things that annoys me so much is when founders get really upset when candidates ask about compensation, and they say, well, like, what if this equity doesn't work out? Oh, like, you must not believe in us, you shouldn't work here, right? It's like 9 out of 10 startups fail. Like, there's a very high likelihood. Let's talk to them about why we believe that we're gonna do everything we can, but you're gonna gain so much more by being able to have the honest conversation around, like, what would failure look like? How would we protect you? What would you have gained from this experience, even if equity wasn't worth anything?
So you just talked about the thing that, so what, when you were saying that, what I was thinking about is I'm a recruiter inside a company where my founder has that behavior. And there's a power dynamic at play such that the founder signs my paychecks. And I need to be really careful how I give that founder feedback in order to make sure that we are recruiting the best talent and that we have some sort of differentiation, and that the founder doesn't take every question from candidates personal. But specifically, one of the things that I learned at DoorDash is the timing of the feedback is really important. And you can't hit a founder with feedback when they're like in the moment, like super hot and bothered. Like, it's just not going to work for you. And I learned this the hard way. So it wasn't like I was like, oh, I know what I'm doing. And I was like, because I would give Tony feedback right away at DoorDash, and he did not like that. And it did not resonate well at all. And so if this is happening to you inside of a company and you're like, shit, like there's something that like I need to give my founder feedback on, I think picking the right time to do that is so important and so hard to do because there's nuance in that, right? Like, you don't want the feedback to get stale, but you need that person to be non-emotional. And then the other thing I think you can do is you can draw on other experiences or people outside of the organization to say like, oh, I heard this in a conversation, with my friend who's at this other company, and one of the things that they did, versus going through the front door, which I am brutal at. Like, I go directly through the front door with feedback to the people that I work with. I think when you're giving feedback to your founder, you have to be way more creative in order for the feedback to land and in order for them not to hate you.
I agree with you, but in my experience, the timing piece is important. I've definitely made many mistakes there too, by the way. But what like whenever I think what is more important is having credibility. Like I would imagine, Nolan, like the reason why it sounds like maybe you pick some good times, pick some bad times, but the reason why ultimately that relationship still worked was you were really good at your job, and you were someone that Tony over time believed um knew what you were doing, right? So like the source of the feedback was a credible one. I think what I have found to be really important, and I'll draw upon my experience with Sword here. Like V, he's also really tough, right? Founders tend to be, but one of the things that I the roles I ended up playing at Sword was I was somewhat like the person who translated difficult messages to him. And I honestly don't really feel like I said things in a completely unique or different way than the way other executives said it. It's just that he really trusted me, you know? It's just that I came to know like what were the things that were really important to him. And like for V, it was little things. It was like, hey, you said you'd send me that report by Friday and you didn't send it until Saturday. Like I think some people didn't realize how important that was, but like early on I realized that he's the kind of person where like this to him is indicative of a larger trust thing. And so after putting in a few of those trust points on the board, we got to a point where we're able to, I felt like I didn't have to like perfect the timing as much. You're actually talking like colleagues.
I want to talk about that like recruiting against tier 1 brands. So we're recording this in the beginning of 2025. Right now, like AI is hotter than it's ever been. OpenAI, Perplexity, Anthropic, right? And there's obviously like a couple of others that are always hot. But it just feels like if you're recruiting against one of those companies, what they have is big brand, big comp, right? And, at least a good pitch, as to like why the equity portion of that comp is going to be even bigger. If I'm like Series A, Series B startup, and I'm trying to compete for talent, how the hell do I win against them?
I'm gonna, if it's okay, I'm gonna interpret this question, Nolan, a little bit broader because I think that it's really important to, you know, to like have real talk. Like right now, AI is having such a moment that like I do think that perhaps against like the open AIs of the world, like very few people have a chance against those folks. But
Wow,
like,
it's okay. That's interesting.
yeah, well, okay, I like one of my most respected the um like executives, candidates I work with who like I always have felt like, you know, like he's one of those folks like I call when I want to look good to a client. Like he's that type of caliber person. He told me that like he would be a janitor at OpenAI. You know, I do think that people are aware of how special of a moment this is in human history and like the acceleration of technology that I do think these are somewhat once a generation companies. I'll answer your question broader about like just like how do you compete against big companies with stronger brands and higher comp packages because I think that's probably a little bit more uh productive. And I'm gonna have a little bit of a contrarian opinion here. I don't think startups should focus on like how do you outsell um those companies for like the really incredible A plus rockstar resumes. I think what startups can do to at the end of the day have a talent um, advantage and actually have an increased talent density, which is how we started call, is be better at identifying that undiscovered talent. So there was a point in time when that person, you know, this A plus Stripe Brex Uber candidate that we're talking about, there was a time when he or she graduated from college and was looking for their first job, right? Like to me, the company that I give the most points to is who gave them their first job because it doesn't take a genius to realize now that they're pretty successful in their role.
Yep. It's so true. And it's actually kind of required because oftentimes at up and coming companies, you can't even compete from a compensation standpoint to get you into the discussion. So like if you are competing against OpenAI for an AI or ML engineer right now, which word on the street is they're being paid somewhere in the order of like $500K to $1 million a year just in base comp, you can't compete against that unless like you've raised that sort of money. And if you have, then you're probably one of those logos that can compete against OpenAI regularly. And so I love that because it actually forces you to find the undiscovered talent. What like have you thought about like breaking it down into like how can companies figure out where undiscovered talent is and then how to assess for it?
Yeah, this one's hard. For every success story, I'll say I've had two or three non-success stories, but I still think like I'm pretty happy with that batting average because when you find someone really good, like they pay dividends for years, right? If you're good at managing, if you give them a good home. Um, One thing that I actually think is underutilized is like the contract to hire thing. So not always practical, especially at the executive level, but I think we're talking about beyond executive here. A lot of these folks, right? Like if they do have a non-traditional background, if they don't have the obvious Stripe, Uber, Airbnb resume, this is their big break. Like they want to intertech, they want to demonstrate that they have what it takes. A lot of times they'll take a 3 month contract, and that's a 3 month interview process. You and I have talked this, Nolan. Like interviewing is a total crapshoot. Like I think it's important to be aware of that. And so the longer you can extend that interview process, the better. And so I've made some really excellent hires where they interviewed like okay, like I saw something there, certainly enough to like give them a shot, but I wasn't ready to give them a full-time offer. And I put them on a 2 3 month contract. And 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 of those have gone on to like pay dividends. We have several examples of that at Plenty actually right now. Um, I know that that's not always an option. So I would say the second thing is like the two most important attributes to me is like how much grit do they have? Like how badly do they want this? And then secondly is like how intelligent are they? Startups are really volatile. Our jobs are changing every few months, and so you need someone who is able to be a really deep thinker and problem solver, not come to you every single time their job description changes. I realize those things are easier said than done to identify, but those are the things I really look for.
Yeah, the two things that really stand out to me there is like simulation of the job. Like the closer you can get to job simulation, the higher degree of confidence you can have that the person's going to be successful. And generally, a behavioral interview is not that, right? Interviews are a crapshoot because like it's not job simulation. It's like we're talking about something like hypothetically.
Yeah, you and I could be horrible at our jobs right now, but we come off decently credible, right? Like they know what they're talking about. And that is the crux of the problem.
Exactly. And then the second thing is, somebody once said this, is chips on shoulders equals chips in pockets. And to your point around like grit, like the way I think about it is that level of like perseverance. One of the questions I like to ask is, what's the hardest thing you've done in your life? And I like it for a number of reasons. Is like, one, I get to really know about the person, but two is I get to learn about the adversity that they've experienced in their life and then how they overcame it. And kind of like the hero's journey. I think all of us actually have this within us, but in a startup, you need it to like a 10th degree. And it has to be dialed all the way up in order to survive all of the shit that's ultimately going to burn down on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of how the undiscovered talent piece for me.
Yeah, totally. I haven't heard that saying, by the way. I'm going to use that. The other thing too is like, if I were a founder, the advice I'd like to give them is like this. I want to be self-aware. Like I'm aware that hearing this can sometimes feel like, oh gosh, like this isn't practical. You know, like how many hires can I use using this methodology, right? And like I want to say again, you don't need an army of these people. You need a handful and your life will be dramatically better. So like make it a quality game, not a quantity game. Like in every company I've ever worked at, like every successful company, like those companies, their backs were on the backs of like a handful of 5 or 10 people. The second thing, if you're a founder, I want to again be really pragmatic about this, is these folks tend to be much easier to manage. They tend to be paid under market. You should correct them over time, but I think in the beginning, as you're taking a bet on them, it's fair to pay them under market. They stay for a while, right? Because they don't have the obvious resume. And so, you know, instead of having these folks who are amazing and are leaving these companies every year and a half, which unfortunately we see all the time at Plenty Search, if you give someone a bet, like if you take a bet on someone, there's real loyalty there. And they stay 3, 4, 5 years. And then the last thing, this is fluffy, is it's more fun managing those people. You're not constantly having conversations about like, so when's my next promotion? Oh, well, the other offer that I declined to go work at this company said I'd be a director by now. So it feels like we should have that conversation. Like those things are fine. I respect it. I think everyone should manage their own career, but you have less of them because I think like there's this inherent trust and this inherent like, you know, loyalty when someone realizes that like you've taken a bet on them.
Amen, brother. Thach, this was a blast. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks.